My name is Emily Harper, and at 26 years old, I never expected to completely restart my life. Growing up as the less valued child was something I had accepted until my parents announced that only my sister would join their vacation because they couldn't afford 2 tickets. That moment broke something inside me. While they enjoyed their beachside getaway, I made a decision that would change everything. Before I share how I finally stood up for myself, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I grew up in a typical middle-class neighborhood in Naperville, Illinois, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns that gave the impression of perfect family lives behind every door. Our family consisted of 4 people: my dad, James Harper, a financial advisor at a local firm; my mom, Susan, who worked part-time as a dental hygienist; my older sister, Olivia; and me. From my earliest memories, I could sense the difference in how my parents treated us. When Olivia turned 8, they threw her an elaborate princess-themed party with a hired entertainer and a custom cake. For my 8th birthday, 2 years later, Mom baked a simple chocolate cake, and we had a small gathering in our backyard. Dad explained they had already done the big party thing once, and it seemed unnecessary to do it again. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. Olivia always received new clothes at the start of each school year, while I wore her hand-me-downs. When I asked for new jeans in 7th grade because I was tired of wearing Olivia's outdated styles, Mom said, "It's just wasteful to buy new things when perfectly good clothes are available." Yet, the next weekend, they took Olivia shopping for a brand new winter wardrobe because she needed to look her best for the school play. I tried everything to earn their love and attention. I maintained straight A's throughout school, joined the debate team, and won district competitions. My parents would nod and say, "Good job." But their eyes would light up when Olivia brought home a B+ or was merely selected for the school choir. When I brought home a state debate championship trophy, Dad said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to help Olivia with her history homework, where she was struggling to maintain a C average. I also became the family helper, taking on chores without being asked. I learned to cook dinner by 13, did laundry for the family, and even helped Dad with yard work. "Emily is just naturally more responsible," Mom would tell relatives, not as a compliment, but as justification for why they asked more of me and expected less from Olivia. Their explanations always sounded reasonable in isolation. Olivia needs more support with schoolwork, or Olivia needs more confidence in social situations. But collectively, they formed a pattern that was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Unfortunately, no one was. As a teenager, I developed a fierce independent streak. I started babysitting at 14, saving every dollar I earned. By 16, I was working weekends at a local coffee shop, using my earnings to buy things my parents wouldn't provide: better quality clothes, art supplies for my growing interest in design, and eventually a laptop for school projects when my parents said we could all share the family computer. Meanwhile, Olivia received a car for her 16th birthday. I got driving lessons and permission to occasionally use Mom's car if I paid for gas. When I turned 16 6 months later, there was no car for me because we already have enough vehicles in the family. Instead, they gave me a new backpack and a scientific calculator for school. College brought more of the same. I applied for scholarships, worked 20 hours a week at a campus design lab, and took out modest student loans to attend the University of Wisconsin's design program. Olivia went to a private college with full parental support, changed majors 3 times, and graduated a year late with average grades and no work experience. Despite everything, I excelled. My graphic design portfolio caught the attention of a Portland firm during my senior showcase, and I moved west after graduation. My starting salary wasn't impressive, but it was enough to rent a small studio apartment and slowly build a life that was entirely mine. Over the next 6 years, I established myself professionally, eventually becoming a senior designer with a respectable income. I took pride in my apartment, filling it with carefully selected furniture and decorations that I purchased myself. Each item represented a small victory of self-sufficiency: the comfortable gray sofa I bought after my first promotion, the original artwork from local artists, the quality kitchen equipment that reflected my love of cooking. Every time I visited home, which became less frequent as years passed, I brought gifts for everyone. Not because they reciprocated, but because I wanted to be the kind of daughter and sister I wished they had been as parents and sibling. Dad would accept my thoughtful books with a distracted thanks before asking Olivia about her latest dating drama. Mom would place my carefully selected decorative items in less visible areas of the house while prominently displaying Olivia's impulse purchases. I maintained a relationship with them out of a sense of obligation and the persistent hope that something might change. Each holiday and family gathering, I would arrive with optimism that was inevitably deflated by the familiar dynamic. Olivia at the center of attention, my achievements mentioned briefly, if at all, and my contributions to family meals or events taken for granted. Despite everything, I maintained my independence. My apartment in Portland became my sanctuary, filled with things I had earned. My close friendships with colleagues and neighbors provided the emotional support my family never did. I was building a good life on my own terms, even if a small part of me still longed for the parental recognition I had never received. I had no idea that a simple vacation announcement would finally force me to confront the reality of my family situation and make the hardest decision of my life. The betrayal happened during what should have been an ordinary family dinner. I had flown home for the weekend to celebrate Dad's 53rd birthday, spending nearly $400 on a last-minute flight that stretched my budget. I had also brought an expensive watch as his gift, having saved for months to afford it. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Mom had prepared Dad's favorite pot roast, and even Olivia had made an effort to bring a store-bought cake. After dinner, as we sat around the table with coffee and cake, Dad cleared his throat. "We have an exciting announcement," he said, reaching for Mom's hand. "Your mother and I have been saving, and this summer, we're taking a family vacation to Hawaii for 2 weeks." My heart leapt with excitement. A family vacation? We hadn't taken one since I was in high school when we spent a weekend at a lakeside cabin. Hawaii sounded amazing and like exactly the kind of bonding experience we needed. "That's incredible," I said, genuinely thrilled. "When are we going? I'll need to request time off work." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom glanced at Dad, who suddenly became very interested in his coffee mug. Olivia looked down at her plate, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well," Mom finally said, "the thing is, Emily, we couldn't afford tickets for everyone." I felt like I'd been doused with cold water. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Hawaii is expensive," Dad explained, still not meeting my eyes. "We saved what we could, but it's only enough for 3 tickets and accommodations." "So," I said slowly, the realization dawning on me, "you're going without me." "Olivia really needs this break," Mom rushed to explain. "She's been so devastated since her breakup with Ethan." The devastating breakup had been a 3-month relationship that ended 2 months ago when Ethan accepted a job in another state. Olivia had been on 2 dates since then. "I work remotely," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I could contribute to my portion. I have savings." "It's not just the plane ticket," Dad said. "It's the hotel room, the activities, the meals out." I nodded, trying to process this information without showing how much it hurt. "I understand budgets are tight." The conversation shifted to their plans: the beachfront hotel, the luau they had booked, the shopping days, The helicopter tour of the islands. It became increasingly clear that money wasn't actually the issue. The activities they described would cost thousands on top of the basic travel expenses. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I slipped into Dad's home office and found the travel itinerary on his desk. The total cost for their trip was over $12,000. A quick calculation showed that adding me would have increased the cost by perhaps 25% at most if we shared accommodations. They could afford it. They just chose not to. The next morning, Olivia cornered me in the kitchen. "I'm really sorry you can't come," she said, her expression unconvincingly sympathetic. "Maybe next time." Before I could respond, she launched into a detailed description of the swimsuits she planned to buy and the Instagram photos she would take on the beaches. I stood there, coffee mug clutched in my hand, as she rambled on about making memories as a family that wouldn't include me. Back in Portland, I had to explain to friends and coworkers why I wouldn't be joining the family vacation. Each explanation felt more humiliating than the last. "My family is going to Hawaii, but there wasn't room in the budget for me to join," I would say, trying to sound casual. "Couldn't you pay your own way?" a coworker asked, confusion evident in her voice. I offered, but it's complicated, was all I could say. The humiliation deepened as vacation preparations began. Olivia created a family group chat specifically for sharing Hawaii plans, somehow forgetting that I could see everything. There were discussions about restaurant reservations, debates about which beaches to visit, and excited messages about shopping for new vacation clothes. Mom sent a photo of 3 matching beach hats they had purchased with the caption, "Family Vacation Gear." The irony of calling it a family vacation when 1/4 of the family was excluded wasn't lost on me. Dad called once, seemingly as an afterthought. "We'll bring you back a souvenir," he offered, as if that would make up for everything. "Something nice from one of the shops." "That's not necessary," I replied, my voice hollow. "Well, we want you to feel included," he said. The statement was so absurd that I nearly laughed. "If you wanted me to feel included, I would be going on the vacation," I said. An uncomfortable silence followed. "You know, we would bring you if we could afford it," he finally said. "Right," I responded, no longer having the energy to pretend I believed him. The final straw came when Olivia called, asking if she could borrow my high-quality camera for their trip. "I want to take really good photos of our family memories," she explained, the audacity of asking to borrow my expensive camera, which I had saved for months to purchase, to document family memories that deliberately excluded me was too much. "I'm sorry," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I need it for work." It was the first time I had ever denied one of her requests, and her shocked silence was both satisfying and heartbreaking. As their departure date approached, my social media feeds filled with their excited posts. Mom shared photos of their packed suitcases. Olivia posted a countdown with daily updates about how excited she was for family time. Dad checked in at the airport lounge the morning of their flight with the caption, "Beginning our adventure." I stared at the photos, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about a vacation. This was about 2 decades of being treated as less than, of having my feelings disregarded, of being expected to accept scraps of attention while Olivia received the feast. As their plane took off for Hawaii, I made a decision that would change everything. The first few days after they left, I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. Colleagues commented on my sudden productivity, unaware that I was using work to avoid confronting the painful emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. "You seem really focused lately," my boss commented after I submitted a project 2 days ahead of schedule. "Just trying to keep busy," I replied with a tight smile. At night, Alone in my apartment, the distractions fell away. I would lie awake, replaying memories from throughout my life, seeing them with new clarity. The time my 8th grade art project won a regional prize, and my parents skipped the ceremony because Olivia had a cold. The high school graduation where they spent the entire celebration talking about Olivia's college plans, though she was only a sophomore. The Christmas when Olivia received a new laptop while I got a gift card. Each memory stung freshly, as if they had just happened. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't understand how I had normalized it for so long. The breaking point came 3 days into their vacation when Olivia posted a series of beach photos on social media. One showed my parents and sister, arms around each other, beaming at the camera with a stunning sunset behind them. The caption read, "So blessed to have the most amazing family vacation ever. Nothing better than quality time with the people who matter most." I sat on my sofa, staring at those words. The people who matter most. The implication was clear. I wasn't among them. Something broke inside me. For the first time since I was a small child, I sobbed openly, great heaving cries that felt like they were being torn from deep within my chest. I cried for the little girl who had tried so hard to earn love that should have been freely given. I cried for the teenager who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. I cried for the adult who still hoped, despite all evidence, that someday things would change. When the tears finally subsided, I called my best friend Lauren. We had met in college and remained close despite the distance when she moved to Denver for work. She was the one person who truly understood my family dynamic, having witnessed it firsthand during several visits. "I don't know why I'm still surprised when they do things like this," I said after explaining the situation. "Because you keep hoping they'll change," Lauren replied gently. "Emily, have you ever considered that this isn't just favoritism? What they're doing is emotional abuse." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "That seems extreme," I protested weakly. "Is it? They consistently prioritize your sister, dismiss your feelings, and exclude you from family events. They gaslight you when you question it. How is that not abusive?" I had no answer. "What would you say if a friend described this same situation to you?" she pressed. I thought about it. "I'd tell them they deserve better." "Exactly," Lauren said. "So, why don't you deserve better?" That question lingered in my mind for days. The following week, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated immediately. After I explained my family situation, she nodded thoughtfully. "What you're describing is a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic," she said. "It's sadly common in family systems, but that doesn't make it any less damaging." "But they don't hit me or call me names," I said. "Is it really abuse?" "Emotional neglect is a form of abuse," she explained. "Consistently treating one child as less valuable than another causes deep psychological harm. The fact that you question whether your pain is valid is itself a symptom of the dynamic." Over the next several sessions, Dr. Margaret helped me see how this family pattern had shaped my self-perception and behaviors. My overachieving was an attempt to earn approval. My independence was a protective mechanism. My continued hope for change was a trauma response. "But I love them," I said during one particularly difficult session. "They're still my family." "Of course you love them," she replied, "and that makes this harder. But love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to establish boundaries." Boundaries. The word felt foreign yet liberating. I had never considered that I had the right to set boundaries with my family. Between therapy sessions, I began an inventory of my relationship with my parents and sister. I listed every financial contribution I had made to family events, Every time I had traveled to see them versus their visits to me, every instance when my achievements had been minimized while Olivia's were celebrated. The results were startling. Over the past 6 years, I had spent over $8,000 on flights home. They had visited me once when Olivia had wanted to see a concert in Portland. I had contributed to holiday meals, family gifts, and even helped pay for repairs to Dad's car when it broke down during my visit last year. The list of slights and dismissals filled several pages of my journal. One evening, I found a box of old diaries in my closet. I began reading entries from high school and college, shocked to see how clearly my younger self had documented the favoritism. My 17-year-old self had written, "Mom got angry when I asked about getting contact lenses, said I should use the glasses from last year's prescription. Olivia got contacts last week because she needs to look her best for prom. I have prom too." The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't a recent development or my imagination. It was a lifelong pattern. During this period of reflection, I also realized something profound. Everything in my apartment, everything I truly valued, I had acquired myself. My furniture, my artwork, my books, my kitchen equipment, even my plants. I had built a life where I didn't need to depend on anyone else for validation or support. One night, as I sat surrounded by the beautiful space I had created for myself, a powerful thought surfaced. What if I stopped waiting for them to change and instead changed the one thing I could control? My participation in this dynamic. Dr. Margaret had talked about how family systems resist change. By continuing to play my assigned role, I was helping to maintain the very system that hurt me. What would happen if I simply stepped away? The thought was terrifying, yet exhilarating. I had 2 more weeks before my family returned from Hawaii. 2 weeks to decide whether I was ready to make the hardest decision of my life. I sat at my kitchen table that night, journal open, and wrote a single question. What would it look like to choose myself first? As I began to write possible answers, I felt something shift inside me, a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. By morning, my decision was made. I would use their absence to completely change my life, not out of spite or revenge, but as an act of self-respect and self-preservation. For the first time in 26 years, I was choosing myself. With clarity of purpose, I threw myself into planning my new life. First, I created a detailed inventory of everything I had purchased that currently resided in my parents' home. Over the years, I had contributed significantly to household items, thinking I was building a shared family life. The living room television I bought when Dad complained about watching sports on their old model, the high-end coffee maker that replaced the broken one in the kitchen, the guest bedroom furniture I purchased when Mom mentioned wanting to update it, the lawnmower I got Dad for his birthday 3 years ago, various kitchen appliances, decorative items, and linens I had gifted over holidays and birthdays. The list was longer than I expected, filling 2 pages of my notebook. Each item represented an attempt to contribute to a family that never fully included me. Next came the most significant decision: where to go. I could stay in Portland, but the thought of remaining so accessible to my family felt stifling. I wanted a fresh start somewhere completely new. Denver immediately came to mind. Lauren had been inviting me to visit for years, describing the creative community and beautiful landscapes. It was about as far from Illinois as I could get while staying in the continental United States. The distance felt symbolic as well as practical. I called my boss the next morning. Sarah had always been supportive of my career and had recently been encouraging team members to consider remote positions as the company expanded. "I've been thinking about your remote work offer," I said when we met in her office. "You're interested?" she asked, looking pleased. "That's great. You're one of our strongest designers, and I'd hate to lose you." "I am, but I'd want to relocate to Denver." She raised her eyebrows. That's a big move. Time zone difference too. I know, but I'm ready for a change. I'd make the schedule work, be available for all client meetings regardless of time, and I'd come back quarterly for in-person team sessions. We discussed logistics for nearly an hour. By the end, we had an agreement. I would transition to remote work with a slight salary adjustment to account for Denver's higher cost of living. I would start the new arrangement in 2 weeks, giving me time to relocate. With work secured, I turned to housing. I spent evenings researching Denver neighborhoods, comparing rental prices and amenities. After virtual tours of 7 apartments, I found a 1-bedroom in the Lodo neighborhood with large windows, a small balcony, and walking distance to several parks. The lease required a considerable security deposit on short notice, but I had been saving diligently for years. I signed the paperwork electronically and transferred the funds, feeling a rush of both terror and exhilaration as I committed to my new home. Next came the logistics of moving across the country. I requested quotes from several moving companies, eventually selecting one that specialized in long-distance relocations. The cost was significant, nearly $3,000, but they could accommodate my timeline and offered full packing services. I also needed to decide what would come with me. The large furniture would stay in Portland and be sold quickly. I found a consignment shop that agreed to handle everything, estimating I could recoup about 40% of the original value. I would take only what would fit in several large suitcases: clothes, personal mementos, and a few smaller items with sentimental value. But most importantly, I needed to retrieve my belongings from my parents' home in Illinois. I scheduled a separate moving service to go to their house the day before they returned from Hawaii. I provided a detailed inventory and a copy of my ID to prove ownership of the items. The movers would pack everything on my list and transport it to a storage facility in Denver, where I could claim it after my arrival. The financial calculations were sobering. Between breaking my lease in Portland, security deposits in Denver, moving costs, and temporary housing while I waited for my apartment to be ready, I would be spending most of my savings. But as Dr. Margaret pointed out during our session that week, I was investing in my mental health and future happiness. As the plan took shape, I felt a strange combination of grief and liberation. I was mourning the family relationship I had always wanted but never had, while simultaneously freeing myself from the expectation that it would ever change. I carefully managed my social media, posting normally about work projects and Portland activities to avoid raising suspicions. Olivia continued to flood my feed with vacation photos, each one reinforcing that I had made the right decision. The weekend before my family's return, I began methodically packing my Portland apartment. Each item went into one of 3 categories: sell, donate, or bring to Denver. I was ruthless in my sorting, keeping only what truly brought me joy or served a necessary purpose. As I packed the framed photo of my college graduation, the only family event where I had genuinely felt proud in their presence, I decided to leave it behind. My new life would not be defined by seeking validation from people unwilling to give it. I wrote email drafts to friends in Portland, explaining my move and promising to stay in touch. I researched coffee shops and design studios in Denver where I might find community. I created a budget for my first 3 months, accounting for all expenses and potential emergencies. On the final night before the movers arrived at my parents' house, I wrote the most difficult letter of my life. It took 7 drafts to find the right tone. Firm but not angry, clear but not vindictive, final but not cruel. Dear Mom, Dad, and Olivia, by the time you read this, I will have moved to Denver to begin a new chapter in my life. I explained my decision calmly, citing specific examples of the favoritism without accusation. I detailed which items I had taken and why. I expressed hope that someday we might build a healthier relationship, but made it clear that would require significant changes in how they treated me. I ended with, "I will always love you, but I have finally learned to love myself enough not to accept being treated as less important. I wish you well and hope you can understand that this distance is necessary for my well-being." I arranged for the letter to be left on the kitchen table where they would find it immediately upon returning home. As the day of the move from my parents' house approached, I coordinated with the moving company via phone, providing access information for the hidden key my parents always kept under a fake rock by the back door. I felt strange directing strangers to enter my childhood home in my family's absence, but I reminded myself that I was only taking what was rightfully mine. The movers sent confirmation photos as they packed each item on my list. Seeing my possessions being boxed up from the house I grew up in brought unexpected emotions, but I remained resolute. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and the physical manifestations of my contributions that had never been properly valued. With everything in motion, I took one last walk through my Portland neighborhood, saying goodbye to the bakery where I bought morning coffee, the park where I sketched on weekends, the bookstore where the owner knew my preferences. I felt a pang of sadness leaving this place where I had built my first independent life. But the excitement of what lay ahead outweighed the melancholy. My plan was in place. In less than 48 hours, my family would return to a house missing many items they had taken for granted, just as they had taken me for granted, and I would be on a plane to my new beginning 3,000 miles away. The morning of moving day arrived with surprising clarity. I had expected to feel anxious or conflicted, but instead experienced a calm certainty that I was making the right choice. I woke before my alarm, made a final cup of coffee in my Portland apartment, and watched the sunrise from my window one last time. The moving crew arrived precisely at 8 cool, a team of 3 efficient women who quickly assessed the relatively small amount I was taking with me. "Most of our clients have more stuff," the lead mover commented as she reviewed my inventory. "I'm traveling light for this new chapter," I replied, surprising myself with the lightness in my voice. They worked methodically, wrapping my few chosen items in protective materials and labeling each box with precise descriptions of the contents. By noon, everything was loaded into their truck. I stood in the empty apartment that had been my home for 6 years. The space looked different without my belongings, smaller somehow, yet also full of memories. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter where I had learned to make pasta from scratch. I stood by the window where I had watched countless snowstorms. I remembered bringing home my first major design award and having no one to celebrate with but myself. Before leaving, I wrote a thank you note to my landlord, who had been understanding about my breaking the lease early. I included an extra month's rent as a gesture of goodwill and left the keys on the counter as instructed. As I closed the door for the final time, I whispered, "Thank you," to the space that had sheltered me during my first years of true independence. Outside, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was walking her terrier. She stopped when she saw my suitcases. "You're not leaving us, are you, dear?" she asked, genuine disappointment in her voice. "I am. I'm moving to Denver for a fresh start." "So suddenly? I didn't know you were planning a move." I smiled. "Sometimes the best decisions happen quickly." "Well, we'll miss you. You've been such a lovely neighbor, always so quiet and considerate." Her simple acknowledgement of my presence and positive contribution moved me more than I expected. This elderly woman, whom I only interacted with occasionally, had shown me more genuine appreciation than my family typically did. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That means a lot." I took a rideshare to the airport, watching the Portland skyline recede in the distance. At the same time, according to my carefully orchestrated timeline, Movers were arriving at my parents' home in Illinois. They would be efficiently packing all the items on my inventory list, from the television to the kitchen appliances to the lawn equipment in the garage. I had a 3-hour layover in Minneapolis, which I spent on a video call with Lauren, finalizing details for my arrival in Denver. "The movers just confirmed they've finished at your parents' house," Lauren said, checking her phone. "Everything's being loaded for transport to Denver." "How do you feel?" she asked, studying my face through the screen. I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've put down something very heavy that I've been carrying for years." "Good," she nodded. "That's exactly how you should feel." My plane landed in Denver just after 7 us in the evening. The air felt different here, drier and crisper than the Pacific Northwest humidity I was accustomed to. Mountains loomed in the distance, partially obscured by clouds, a landscape utterly different from anything in my previous life. Lauren was waiting at arrivals, her familiar face a welcome sight in this unfamiliar place. We hugged tightly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt tears threatening. "You did it," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Her apartment was a cozy 2-bedroom in the Five Points neighborhood, filled with plants and colorful artwork. She had prepared the guest room with fresh flowers and a welcome basket of local Denver treats. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's home until yours is ready." "It's perfect," I assured her, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of her welcome. That first night in Denver, we sat on her balcony, drinking wine and watching the sunset over the Rockies. The beauty was breathtaking, so different from anything in Illinois or Oregon. "Tomorrow's going to be hard," Lauren said gently. "They'll be home and finding your letter." I nodded, taking a deep breath of the mountain air. "I know, but for the first time, their reaction isn't my responsibility. I've said what I needed to say." My phone remained off. I wasn't ready to deal with the inevitable flood of messages that would come once they discovered my absence and the missing items. That could wait for tomorrow after I'd had one night of peace in my new city. The next morning dawned, clear and cool. I awoke disoriented momentarily before remembering where I was and what I had done. Today, my family would be returning to a house partially emptied of items they had never properly appreciated, just as they had never properly appreciated me. I turned on my phone, bracing for the notifications. Nothing yet. Their flight must not have landed, or perhaps they were still in transit from the airport. The temporary reprieve allowed me to enjoy a quiet morning with Lauren before she left for work. "Take it easy today," she advised. "Explore the neighborhood if you feel up to it, but don't pressure yourself to do anything. This is a lot to process." I spent the morning setting up my laptop and connecting with my design team back in Portland. Work provided a welcome distraction, the familiar creative challenges grounding me amid so much change. Around noon, my phone began buzzing continuously. Text messages, voicemails, social media notifications. They had arrived home and discovered both my absence and the missing items. I took a deep breath and began sorting through the messages. "Dad. Emily. Call us immediately. What is going on?" "Mom. How could you take our things without permission? Call home now." "Olivia. Oh my God, what did you do? Mom and Dad are freaking out." 10 more messages followed in quick succession, each more demanding than the last. The voicemails were worse, with Dad's voice rising in anger and Mom crying in the background. I waited until evening to respond, composing a single group text. "I took only what I purchased. Everything I took belongs to me." I explained my reasons in the letter. "Please respect my need for space right now." Then I silenced my phone and joined Lauren for dinner at a local restaurant, my first meal as a Denver resident. The weight of my family's reaction was heavy, but beneath it was a growing sense of freedom I had never experienced before. The next day, I had a virtual session with Dr. Margaret, who helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my decision. "Remember that their anger comes from disruption to the family system," she explained. "When someone stops playing their assigned role, it forces everyone else to confront uncomfortable truths." "Do you think I was wrong to take everything without warning them?" I asked. "You took what belonged to you after years of giving without appropriate acknowledgement. Their surprise is not your responsibility. This was a necessary step in establishing that your contributions have value." Over the following days, I settled into a routine in Denver. Mornings were for work, afternoons for exploring my new city, evenings for processing the ongoing fallout with my family. I found a coffee shop with a view of the mountains where I could work for hours undisturbed. I discovered a farmer's market where vendors greeted newcomers warmly. I began to envision what my life here could become. The storage company notified me when my items from Illinois arrived. Seeing my possessions arranged in the storage unit was surreal, these familiar things now displaced, like I had been. Soon, they would furnish my new apartment, creating a home that was wholly mine, built without compromise or the need to earn approval. A week after my departure, the messages from my family began to change tone. Dad's anger gave way to confused questioning. Mom's accusations turned to tearful pleas. Olivia, surprisingly, sent a single text that stood out from the rest. "I get it now. I never realized how much you provided for the house. I'm sorry." It was the first genuine acknowledgement from any of them, and though it didn't erase years of favoritism, it felt like the first crack in a very thick wall. As I prepared to move into my new apartment, I felt both grief and hope in equal measure. I was grieving the family relationship I had always wanted, but never truly had. Yet, I was hopeful about the life I was building, one where my worth wasn't determined by comparison to someone else. Denver already felt more like home than I had expected. The city's landscapes, from mountains to urban parks to wide-open skies, seemed to reflect the emotional terrain I was navigating, sometimes difficult, often beautiful, and filled with possibilities I hadn't yet discovered. My parents and Olivia returned to an unnervingly quiet house that Sunday afternoon. Their flight from Hawaii had been delayed, so they arrived home tired and irritable, expecting the comfort of familiar surroundings after their long journey. According to what Olivia later told me, they walked through the door with their suitcases, calling out habitually, "Emily, are you here?" Of course, there was no answer. Dad went to put the luggage down in the living room and stopped abruptly. "Where's the TV?" he asked, staring at the empty entertainment center. Mom headed to the kitchen to start coffee, only to find the high-end espresso machine missing from its usual place on the counter. "The coffee maker's gone," she called out, confusion evident in her voice. Olivia went upstairs to her room, which was untouched, then checked the guest room where several pieces of furniture had been removed, leaving conspicuous empty spaces. They converged in the kitchen where my letter waited on the table. Dad read it aloud, his voice growing increasingly strained as he processed my words. "Denver. She moved to Denver without telling us," Mom interrupted, unable to comprehend the magnitude of my decision. They began moving through the house, cataloging everything that was missing. The lawnmower from the garage, the winter coats I had bought for everyone last Christmas, the complete set of cooking pots and knives from the kitchen, the bookshelves and their contents from the den. Items large and small that they had taken for granted were now conspicuously absent. "She can't just take things from our house," Dad shouted, reaching for his phone to call me. "Read the letter again," Olivia said quietly. "Everything she took, she paid for." This was when the frantic messages began, the increasingly angry voicemails, the demands for explanation beyond what I had already provided in my letter. I learned all this later, pieced together from texts, calls, and eventually more measured conversations. At the time, I was focused on setting up my new apartment in Denver, arranging furniture deliveries, and settling into my remote work routine. 3 days after their return, Dad called while I was working at my favorite coffee shop. I had been ignoring their calls, but something told me it was time to answer. "Emily," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "We need to talk about this." "I think my letter explained everything pretty clearly," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You can't just leave like this. We're your family." "Yes, you are. And families are supposed to make each member feel valued." "We value you," he protested. "We always have." "Dad, please don't. We both know that's not true." A long silence followed. I could hear him breathing, likely struggling with what to say next. "The TV," he finally began. "I bought it 3 years ago when you complained about watching football on the old one," I interrupted. "The receipt was in the drawer underneath it. And the lawnmower. Your birthday present 2 years ago." Another silence. "I didn't realize," he trailed off. "That's part of the problem. You never realized how much I contributed because you never really saw me." The conversation ended awkwardly, with Dad asking me to reconsider and me firmly stating that my decision was final. It wasn't satisfying, but it was a start. The first conversation where I had stated my truth without backing down in the face of his discomfort. Mom's approach was different. She left tearful voicemails about family loyalty and how children shouldn't abandon their parents. I responded with brief, kind texts, reiterating my boundaries and the reasons for my decision. The most surprising reaction came from Olivia. A week after their return, she called late one evening. "Can we talk?" she asked when I answered. "Just us." "Sure," I replied cautiously. "I had no idea," she began, her voice uncharacteristically humble. "About all the things you bought for the house. About how you felt all these years." "I tried to tell you many times." "I know. I didn't listen. None of us did." She paused. "Your letter made me realize some things about myself that aren't very flattering." "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That I've been selfish? That I took advantage of how Mom and Dad treated you? That I never stood up for you when I should have?" Another pause. "And that maybe I was jealous." "Jealous of what?" "Of your independence? Your success? The life you built without anyone's help?" She sighed. "I never had to try very hard for anything. You worked for everything you have." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. While it didn't erase years of hurt, it opened a door to a potentially different relationship in the future. The weeks that followed brought more confrontations and revelations. Extended family members began calling, having heard different versions of what happened. "Your father says you stole furniture from their house," my Aunt Linda said disapprovingly. "I took items I purchased myself," I corrected her. "Would you like me to send you receipts?" "Well, no," she stammered. "It's just not how family behaves." I agree. Family shouldn't consistently make one member feel less valuable than another. These conversations were difficult but clarifying. For the first time, I wasn't accepting the family narrative without question. I was stating my experience and holding firm in my boundaries. Dad tried a different approach next, threatening to come to Denver to sort things out in person. I calmly explained that I wouldn't meet with him if he came uninvited, and that any attempt to force a reconciliation would only push me further away. "I need time and space," I told him, "and evidence that you understand why I left." "What kind of evidence?" he asked, frustrated. "Acknowledgement of the pattern, apology for the harm, commitment to change if we're to have any relationship going forward." He hung up without responding. Mom took a softer approach, sending a package of family photos and a tearful letter about missing me. While touching, it notably lacked any acknowledgement of her role in the dynamic that drove me away. I wrote back, thanking her for the photos but reiterating that reconciliation would require honest recognition of the past, not just emotional appeals to family bonds. Olivia, surprisingly, seemed to be doing the most reflection. She sent occasional texts that showed genuine thought. Found my diary from high school. Realized how often I manipulated situations to get attention away from you. I'm really sorry. And later, went through photo albums today. Noticed how in every family photo I'm in the middle with mom and dad, and you're on the outside. Can't believe I never saw that before. These small recognitions meant more than the grand emotional appeals from my parents. They showed that at least one family member was willing to see the truth. About a month after my departure, Dad called with a different tone. The neighbor asked about the lawnmower, he said. I had to tell him you took it when you moved away. He seemed surprised. Said you were always so helpful with yard work and community projects. I tried to be, I replied. He asked why you left so suddenly. Dad's voice grew quiet. I didn't know what to say. What did you tell him? That we'd made mistakes, that we hadn't been fair to you. He cleared his throat. It was hard to admit, but it's true. It was the first real acknowledgement from him. Small, but significant. Not enough to heal everything, but a start. As I settled more deeply into my Denver life, the constant communication from Illinois gradually decreased. My family began to accept that my decision wasn't a temporary emotional reaction, but a thoughtful choice for my well-being. I maintained firm boundaries, engaging only in conversations that respected my experience, and didn't try to minimize the patterns that had driven me away. Some days were harder than others, but with each passing week, I felt more confident in my decision. My new apartment slowly transformed into a home, filled with both the items I had reclaimed from Illinois and new pieces that represented this chapter of my life. Each addition was chosen with intention, creating a space that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I had been forced to be. 6 months after my dramatic departure, Denver truly felt like home. My apartment overlooking Lodo had taken on my personality, with large windows that welcomed the rare sunny days and created cozy reading nooks during the frequent snows. I had established new routines: Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Sunday hikes in the nearby Rockies when weather permitted, weeknight dinners with the small but growing circle of friends I had made. My remote work arrangement was thriving, with my boss commenting that my creativity seemed to have reached new heights. Whatever you found in Denver, Sarah said during our quarterly review, it agrees with you. What I had found was myself, unencumbered by family expectations and patterns that had limited me for decades. The healing process wasn't linear. Some days brought painful memories or doubts about my decision. Therapy with Dr. Margaret continued, now via video calls, helping me process both grief and growth as I built this new life. Healing doesn't mean the absence of pain, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session after a tense phone call with my parents. It means the pain no longer controls your choices. My first holiday season away from my family was both challenging and liberating. Thanksgiving had always been spent in Illinois, with me doing much of the cooking while receiving little of the appreciation. This year, Lauren and I hosted a Friendsgiving for others who couldn't or chose not to travel home. To chosen family, Lauren toasted, raising her glass around a table of relative strangers who had come together to create something meaningful. Christmas presented different challenges. The familiar guilt surfaced when Mom called, voice wavering, to ask if I would come home for the holiday. Not this year, I said gently but firmly. I'm still establishing boundaries and need more time. Instead, I volunteered at a local community center serving meals, then spent Christmas evening with a colleague and her wife, who had welcomed me into their tradition of Chinese food and classic movies. It wasn't what I had grown up with, but it filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt during family holidays in years. My relationship with each family member evolved differently over these months. Dad had slowly moved from anger to grudging acceptance, and eventually to halting attempts at understanding. Our conversations remained somewhat formal, but no longer hostile. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted during a February phone call, "about never feeling as important as Olivia. I didn't want to believe it, but looking back, I can see why you felt that way." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it was progress. Mom vacillated between emotional appeals and genuine efforts to connect with my new life. She asked questions about Denver, my apartment, my new friends, actually listening to the answers instead of quickly turning the conversation to Olivia as she once would have. "I miss you," she would say at the end of our calls, "but I understand why you needed to leave." Olivia's transformation was perhaps the most surprising. After initial hurt and confusion, she had begun her own therapy, examining her role in our family dynamic. "I never realized how much I benefited from being the favorite," she confessed during one of our increasingly frequent calls. "It wasn't good for me either in a lot of ways, made me dependent and entitled." She had started taking financial management classes and was looking for her first serious job, no longer content to rely on our parents for support. Each small step toward independence seemed to increase her empathy for my experience. In March, my parents suggested family therapy. "We want to understand better," Dad explained, "and maybe find a way forward that acknowledges everyone's needs." I agreed cautiously, and we began monthly video sessions with a family therapist. The first few were tense and tearful, with old patterns threatening to reemerge, but gradually, tentative progress emerged. During one breakthrough session, Mom finally acknowledged the favoritism directly. "We did treat you differently, Emily. I can see that now. We expected more from you and gave you less. It wasn't fair, and I'm truly sorry." Her words, so long awaited, brought tears to my eyes, not because they erased the past, but because they validated what I had felt for so many years. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." The therapy helped us develop new ways of communicating, with clearer boundaries and more honest expressions of needs and feelings. It wasn't perfect, but it was healthier than anything we had managed before. As spring arrived in Denver, bringing wildflowers and longer days, I felt ready for a careful next step. I invited my parents to visit, setting clear parameters: a hotel rather than staying with me, a limited itinerary, and the understanding that this was about building a new relationship, not returning to old patterns. Their visit was both awkward and healing. They seemed smaller, somehow less intimidating than the parental figures who had loomed so large in my mind. We toured the Denver Botanic Gardens, took a train to Winter Park, and had several long conversations in neutral public spaces where everyone remained on their best behavior. On their final evening, Dad looked around my apartment, taking in the space I had created. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "All on your own." "Not entirely on my own," I corrected him, thinking of Lauren, my new friends, my therapist, all the people who had supported my journey. "I've learned that independence doesn't have to mean isolation." As they prepared to leave, Mom hugged me carefully, respecting the physical and emotional boundaries I had established. "We're trying to do better," she whispered. "I hope you can see that." "I do," I assured her. "And I appreciate it." After they returned to Illinois, our relationship continued its tentative evolution. Regular calls, occasional video chats, honest discussions when old patterns threatened to resurface. It wasn't the unconditional love I had once desperately sought, but it was something more honest and ultimately more valuable. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Throughout this journey, I discovered truths that transformed my understanding of family, love, and self-worth. That sometimes loving someone means creating distance that allows both of you to grow. That forgiveness doesn't require returning to harmful situations. That family can be both the people who share your blood and those who share your values. That setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone. Most importantly, I learned that my worth was never determined by my family's ability to see it. It existed independently, waiting for me to claim it for myself. 1 year after my departure, I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over Denver, reflecting on how much had changed. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something useful, a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Just wanted to say, I'm proud of you for everything." I smiled, typing back, "Thank you. I'm proud of us both." The journey from invisible daughter to confident, boundary-setting adult hadn't been easy, but as I looked out over the city that had welcomed me at my most vulnerable and helped me become my strongest self, I knew with absolute certainty that choosing myself had been the most important decision of my life. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family obligation and self-respect? Let me know in the comments if you've experienced similar family dynamics or had to set boundaries for your own well-being. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life experiences and share with someone who might need to hear that. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your worth is never dependent on others recognizing it.